Hello, everybody. My name is Robert Harris, and today we are going to be talking about ethanol in the US and kind of the drivers behind what drives the economic costs and production of ethanol in the United States. So, with that, let's get started. So, looking at the ethanol overview in history, the original concept of ethanol, which is basically just transforming any kind of biomass into alcohol, has been around since about the 1700s. However, in modern times, the new technology development of using ethanol fuel has made it a very important agricultural commodity worldwide. So, ethanol can be made, or fuel ethanol can be made from anything that has high starch or sugar content. That could be corn, barley, sugar cane, sugar beet, timber, really anything. But the main two factors we're going to be talking about today are corn and sugar and how they relate to the United States. In the United States, fuel has become a huge part of the energy sector, finding different supplements to use instead of oil. And ethanol has been one of our main targets for that. So let's move forward into ethanol production. Looking at the history of ethanol production in the United States, we produce almost all of our ethanol from corn. Looking at it from a scientific point of view, it's been proven that sugarcane actually has an energy balance that is 7 times greater than that of corn in terms of producing ethanol. Basically, what that means is you can produce much more ethanol per pound of sugar than you can of corn. This is because only 50% of the corn, the part that's made of starch, is actually able to be used to create ethanol. So you're probably thinking to yourself, why do we use corn to make our ethanol then? The answer is because the United States produces a lot of corn at a very cheap price. Due to the climate we have in the Midwest, we have perfect ideal growing climate for corn, and thus we are the largest corn producer in the entire world, actually. Taking that in terms of ethanol production, according to the USDA, the cost per gallon of ethanol production for corn is only $1.03 per gallon in the United States, producing that domestically. However, the cost of producing domestically from sugarcane is $2.40 per gallon. Even though that you need much more corn to produce ethanol than you do sugar, our extreme price difference in corn and sugar domestically makes it make more sense to use corn, obviously, than it would for us to use sugar to create our ethanol fuel. You're probably wondering why corn production is so much cheaper than domestic sugar production in the US. Looking at the chart to the left here, if you look at Brazil, it only costs them 81 cents to produce a gallon of ethanol from sugar compared to the $1.03 per gallon in US dollars that the US can produce from corn. Even more comparatively to the $2.40 it costs the US to domestically produce 1 gallon of ethanol from sugar. This is because Brazil, being the world's largest sugar producer, can produce sugar at very low costs. This is because the climate in Brazil and other countries in that area of the world have the best possible climate to create sugar and therefore can produce it at much lower prices. Looking at just the inputs, again to the chart to the left, you can see that for a gallon of ethanol for sugar, the input itself of the sugar beet only costs 30 cents per gallon compared to the $1.48 per gallon it costs for the US to think. So you might be thinking, why don't we just import sugar from Brazil at such a low price and then produce all of our ethanol from sugar? This really comes down to the US domestic international trade policy on US sugarcane. The overall goal of the US international sugar policy, or also known as the farm bills that have been coming out over the past about 2 decades, the overall goal is to keep the price of sugar high. This is to help out domestic producers of sugar. As we talked about earlier, how Brazil and countries in that kind of region of the world have the best climate to create sugar. Obviously, they're the highest exporters of sugar. They have an economical advantage in growing sugar at a much faster and cheaper rate than the US producers do. For instance, if we did import sugar at a world price, our domestic producers would not be able to keep up, and everybody would just import their sugar, and basically the sugar economy of production domestically in the United States would eventually fail, which is something that we do not want to happen. With modern technology obviously becoming a lot more innovative, science is increasing, and we're finding ways to gain higher yield from both sugar and corn-based ethanol. As the yield gets higher for both, though, sugar will become a more sought-after commodity for production due to the high energy that sugar holds, as we said earlier, 7 times that of corn, due to the fact that you can only use 50% of the starch from corn, as if you can use the actual sugar from the sugar beet plant, and it could be converted at an even higher yield, given that this trend increases with the science that we're seeing. One way that the U.S. government encourages the domestic sugar price to stay very high is to put in a quota that encourages a surplus. Essentially, what happens at the end of the year is farmers have too much sugar, and the government will buy out this surplus at the U.S. domestic market rate. Thus, the producers can still get paid at the domestic market rate and not have to sell it to somebody at a much lower price, therefore losing money and collapsing the sugar market in the U.S. Obviously, this is very costly to taxpayers. However, by the U.S. buying out all the sugar, we could then reinvest that sugar into fuel for ethanol, which would eventually lower the domestic price of fuel, which relative to worldwide is already decently low. But we would still be able to keep the sugar price high. Under this theory, our main source of ethanol fuel would still be from corn, given that the U.S. has a specialization in corn, and we're the world's largest producer in corn, and we will probably continue to be the world's largest producer in corn. However, using the mix of the domestic international policy of the U.S. to buy out the surplus, convert it to ethanol, plus already using the corn that we domestically produce, which we also have a surplus of, to help create ethanol, will give us an extra edge in ethanol fuel as the battle continues to go for something to replace oil. In the future, who knows? It could be ethanol. It could be something like electric power. We'll see where it takes us. But that's it for me today. Thank you for listening. I hope we learned something today. And have a great rest of your day. See ya.